and I'm with Suzanne Hansen, who is the founder and director of UFO Focus New Zealand, and she's had over 35 years of research in the UFO field. Welcome.
Thank you, Alfred.
Well,
yes, I've had a lot of experience in the field in New Zealand, and have worked with a number of veteran UFO researchers here, both in the area of sightings and in contact as well.
Excellent. Now, we've this past summer, in July to be precise, I attended a conference. In fact, we were both speakers there with a mutual colleague of ours, Mary Rodwell, and she presented an extraordinary case and experience that she had had with you, and that case and experience was very striking to me. It really opened my perception on a number of levels, both as to, I would say there's so many levels I can't count them. And so I will just let you tell your story, and then maybe come in once in a while and ask for clarification. But basically, as I understand it, just to summarize it here very briefly, at a young age, perhaps 8 years old, you were taken up into a gray extraterrestrial craft, and there introduced to someone that was told to you would be very important to you, and that person was in the form then of a ball of light. And in a subsequent visit, I'll let you go on from there. So why don't we just start the story at the beginning, because it's just so extraordinary.
Okay, well, right throughout my life I'd had a lot of strange and unusual experiences happen, and I'd also had UFO sightings with my family. So this whole subject was quite familiar to me, and it was something I wasn't afraid of. As I got older, I began to have flashbacks of contact with extraterrestrials, and I won't go too deeply into that, but I'll move on to the actual incidents you're talking about. Mary and I decided several years ago to do some regression on some of my memories to try to fill in some of the gaps and to actually see what took place in a fuller aspect of some of these experiences. On this occasion, I was taken on board craft as an 8-year-old child in my summer pajamas, and the regression began with me actually being in a very large white room, white walls with a white warm marble-like floor, and there were a whole variety of other children there. So there were several human children along with myself, but there were also species of greys and mixtures of species, what you might call also transgenic children. We were there to learn to communicate with each other, and this was all done through the mind, not verbally. And obviously we had been doing this from a very early age, because during another regression, Mary actually took me back to when I was 6 months old and on board craft. So on this occasion, we were learning to communicate through playing games with the mind. So we could actually create, and this is quite hard for me to get my head around, but we were actually creating holograms in the air, which we would play with as children would play with physical toys. So that was a very interesting point, and I remember commenting on the colour of them, how bright and luminescent and complex the shapes were that we were creating. I was approached by one of the greys who asked me if I would like to meet another child. Said that I would, and I sensed through my communication with him that he was actually holding something back. There was something he wasn't conveying to me. Now, how I sensed that, I'm not too sure. Whether it was just something that I was able to pick up through many years of communicating with them, you know, throughout my life since a baby. Anyway, I was taken along a corridor to a much smaller room where we waited side by side, and I was able to perceive that he was communicating with other greys somewhere else on board the craft, because I pick up snippets of his mental conversations, shall we say. After a short while, two greys appeared through the doorway, and between them, at around about their head level, was a very vibrant, glowing ball of blue light. Roughly the size of a soccer ball, a little bit smaller than that. Upon seeing this light, I instantly became quite emotional and confused in my child's mind, because I recognized something about this light that I loved, and as a child I had no explanation for this. I had no explanation for how I could feel this instant relationship and rapport and love of a blue ball of light that I had no recollection of having seen before. The grey actually at this point asked me to look into his eyes, and he projected conveyed three streams of information to me. The first was just a simple one that this is a friend we want you to get to know, and we would like you to communicate with. Following this was a much deeper stream of information that conveyed to me the full future life of this child, and this conveyed at lightning speed, so my mind was filled with images and pictures and snippets of conversation, as if there was information fast forwarding into my brain and I was only registering very small pieces of it here and there. However, it was sufficient to engender in me quite a bit of confusion. I became tearful, I became concerned, and once again he then inserted the third level, which was simply, you will come to love this child, this soul will be your son one day, you will marry, you'll grow up and marry, and one day you'll have children, and one of these children will be inhabited by this soul. He referred to the blue ball of light as a source, point of energy. So he then just me down to the point where all I had in my mind at that point was, I'm going to be allowed to play with this ball. They were going to leave us alone for a short while in this room to see obviously how we would react to each other. At this point they all exited the room and left me there. I tried to engage the ball in some kind of rapport, so I actually wasn't sure what to do. It was like, well, how do I make this work? What do I do with this ball? So I actually, as a child would do, I asked it if it could bounce, and it didn't move, it just hung in the air. So I got a little bored at that stage, and in the regression I described, I decided I would do cartwheels on the floor for a minute or so. And then I sat down against the wall feeling somewhat disappointed that I was not getting any reaction out of this ball. And at that point I suddenly felt as if I was being watched, and as if a communication began. So in the same way that I can telepathically communicate with the extraterrestrials, this ball of light communicated with me